right, boys and girls, we are on our last two chapters, on chapter 32. Mr. Opus's voice shattered through the apartment. What do you mean, leave? You heard Mako, Dad, Jax reasoned. He's going to come after us again. He can get into our heads. Look at what almost happened today alone. You tried to jump in front of a subway train and I thought I could fly. If it weren't for Axel, there was no need to finish the sentence. The Opuses knew perfectly well what would have happened without the president of the Sandman's Guild. Their son would be dead, and they almost certainly would not be around to mourn him. We're very grateful for Axel, Mrs. Opus assured her son. If we neglected to thank him at the hotel, it was only because we were both in shock. And he was pretty angry with the Sandman at the time. Who would have thought hypnotists would turn out to be such crooks? Her husband chose that moment to inspect his fingernails. This was no time to bring up the family history he'd worked so hard to forget. Jack struck up for the guild members. Those crooks came through for us big time when we needed them. But we can't expect them to stand guard outside of our apartment building. When Mako comes back for us, we will have to be gone. Mr. Opus stubbornly refused to understand. You mean move? Not just move, Jax argued. We have to change our names and go someplace nobody knows us. Like that kind of witness protection program for hypnotism. We can't do that, Mom spurted in outrage. Your father has a job. I have a practice. It's taken years to build our careers to where they are today. You want us to toss all that in the garbage over your hocus pocus? There's nothing magic about diving off a 14th story balcony, Jax insisted. Even if science can't explain how Mako made me do it, it still happened. And I'd be dead, not fantasy dead if I'd hit that floor. The same goes for jumping in front of trains, or off bridges, or lighting yourself on fire, or anything else you can be convinced to do when you're bent. He spread his arms wide. You of all people should listen, Mom. They named this stuff after Mesmer, and he was your cousin. Distant cousin, she said stiffly. Very distant, her husband added. Jax turned on his father, and compared with your relatives, guys like Axel and Mako were amateur knight. It's not hocus pocus. It's real as an earthquake, and if we don't get out of the way, we'll be flattened. The Opuses were quiet for a long moment. Jax had not yet won them over, but he could sense his words were beginning to sink in. Mr. Opus broke the silence at last. It's no small thing to uproot your entire life. I know, Dad. It won't be easy, but the Sandman's Guild has offered to help. Oh, that's a good one, Mom exclaimed. I've seen their kind of help. They're probably waiting for us to leave so they can ransack our apartment. Jack's dad tried to be reasonable. What about money? We have some savings, sure, but that's for the future. It's your college fund, Jax. Jax was grave. No college can accept me if I'm dead. His parents stared at him. Jax came back to himself with a shiver to see Axel Braintree smiling reassuringly at him. He stretched, almost knocking over the folded chiropractor table that was leaning against the stack of boxes in the U-Haul. Well, he asked nervously. In less than 24 hours, the Opuses had upended their lives, packed what they could, and were about to leave New York forever. All that would be for nothing if Scientist Director had implanted any strategic suggestions inside Jax's mind. Mako was compulsive schemer at the point of genius, and Jax had just spent more than 2 months under the man's thumb. Would the director be able to hurt him somehow or compel him to hurt himself even from a distance? Or perhaps Jax had harbored some sort of mesmeric architecture that would serve as a tracking device. That would be just as dangerous. Very little beyond the capability of a hypnotist like Mako. There was no way for Jax to inspect himself for such time bombs, so he had allowed himself to be bent and examined by the president of the Sandman's Guild. It's quite a nifty piece of mind tinkering, Braintree admitted grudgingly. You carry suggestion to forget everything you know about Mako and Sienta. I knew it, Jax growled. I've heard stories about hypnos who don't even recognize the people they work with every day. What's the trigger? That's the genius of it, the old man said. There isn't one. But I remember every hole in every ceiling tile of that place, Jax protested. I wish I didn't, but I do. There's a separate suggestion, postponing the command to forget. And the trigger for that is neither a word or an action. Jax frowned. Then what is it? A face. She's a real looker, too. Blonde, blue-eyed. In my day, they called a woman like that a dish. Jax nodded. Maureen Samuels, the assistant director. She's the first person you see when you arrive and the last when you go home. The old man's brow furrowed. You haven't been there in more than a week. That should have been more than enough time to wipe your mind clean. Shamefaced, Jax produced his cell phone and switched it on. The lock screen showed a picture of himself standing next to the beautiful Miss Samuels. It was just to show the guys at school, he confessed. I guess I never got around to deleting it. Braintree chuckled. Even the great Mako can't think of everything. He should have hired Quasimodo, not Marilyn Monroe. Anyway, You don't have to worry about it. I disabled both suggestions. Jax gave him a rueful smile. A guy who formed a whole guild to convince the Samian not to use hypnotism. You're pretty smooth about it. The old man shrugged. It's a gift. That's the whole problem. One minute you're saving the world, the next you're down at the bank, bending the manager to give you a tour of the vault. Mrs. Opus heaved 2 suitcases over the tailgate. That's the last of it. Your father's gone to take the Bentley back to the dealership. He keeps tearing up, so don't talk about it. Believe me, I won't, Jax promised. You think I feel good about this? I can't even believe it's happening. She sighed, but put on a brave face. We'll leave as soon as he gets back. That gives me a little more time, Jax acknowledged. There's one last thing I need to take care of. Last chapter. The corridors of IS-222 looked strange to Jax, mostly because he knew he would never lay eyes on them again. Funny, there have been days he would have given anything to get away from this dumpy old building with his smell of sweat stocks and stale pizza. Now, he was nostalgic about the place, and it was like it was home sweet home. He's back at his school. Maybe this was his home. Maybe it was this. He hadn't really had time to mourn the disaster that had come over his family. Mom and Dad ripped from their lives and careers thanks to him, and all of them abandoning New York, the only hometown he'd ever known and ever wanted to know. Easy to say goodbye to a rusty row of lockers and admit that Jackson Opus had been, for 12 years, no longer existed. The couple of days he'd been somebody else from somewhere else, and that was unimaginable and unthinkable. It was the middle of 8th period and the halls were empty. That was a good thing. He didn't feel like explaining over and over again what happened since he'd fallen down the stairs and knocked himself silly. Not that anyone would have believed his story. He barely believed it himself. 8th period, French. He pressed his body against the door and peered in through the small window until he caught Tommy's eye. Tommy was up like a shot and out to join him. I thought you were dead, Opus. I texted you like 600 times. Jax hauled his friend to the nearest bathroom. We have to talk. Tell me about it. Did you hear the news about your man, Trey Douglas? CNN called it the biggest political meltdown since Watergate. Bigger, said Jax. And Watergate, President Nixon was bent face to face by a staffer. I got Trey Douglas through his teleprompter. You're not making any sense, man. What's going on? Instead of answering, Jax looked deep into his friend's eyes. Tommy was insulted. You're trying to hypnotize me? What for? Jax relaxed. Relax, Jax intoned. You're becoming very calm. No, I'm not, Tommy spat back. I'm becoming very ticked off. What's with you, Opus? You know you can't hypnotize me. Jax ramped up the intensity of his stare. It was true. He'd never been able to bend Tommy. He also understood that he had to find a way to make it work this time for his friend's sake. There was only one thing for Jax's family to... There was one thing for Jax's own family to suffer, but Tommy was an innocent bystander. Mako had already found Tommy, had mesmerized him at least once. The boy would never be safe as long as he knew about Santa and the Trey Douglas affair. Jax had told him too much already. Fine, Tommy snapped. Bring it on, Merlin. Do your worst. I'm colorblind, remember? I've got you beat. Tell me your famous eyes are gray on gray. That makes it hard, not impossible, Jax thought, sharpening his focus. I fought off Elias Mako last night. I'm an Opus and a Sparks, and I can do this. When the Pip image appeared between them, Jax realized instantly that he could only be coming from Tommy. He saw himself in black and white, and the dark green bathroom stalls were smoky charcoal. Jax wasted no time. Already his intrusion into his friend's mind stung like a terrible betrayal. If he hung around much longer, Tommy's thoughts and feelings would begin to leach into his own, and life was tough enough already today. When you wake up, you'll feel relaxed and happy, and this is very important. You will remember nothing of Jackson Opus's ability to perform hypnotism. You will forget everything he ever told you about Santa Institute and the Sandman's Guild. You will have no recollection of... He recited the laundry list of every possible detail Tommy might have picked up over Jax's weeks as Santa. Never in his brief career as a hypnotist had he been so thorough and so precise. If he left Tommy with one single memory that might somehow land the kid on Mako's radar screen, disaster would surely follow. Jax had turned his own family inside out. If he allowed Tommy to suffer, he never would forgive himself. When he finished, he found himself panting as if he'd just won a marathon. There remained one more thing for him to say, and it was the most painful of all. Anyway, you and Jackson Opus were never that close, he murmured, choking up a bit. You barely know the guy, so it doesn't really bother you that he's not around anymore. He left his friend, his school, his life. He barely noticed the bustling city around him as he retraced his path to the loaded U-Haul. It was time to disappear off the face of the earth. That made me a little sad, I'm not gonna lie. Alright guys, that was The Hypnotist. Now, if you're reading this with me and you really enjoyed it, there is a second book called The Dragonfly Effect, I believe. And it's the same kiddo, Jackson. So that's it, guys. Have a great summer. Bye.